Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and I want to talk about John Krasinski and Ryan Reynolds' fantastic failure. That's what it is. The movie If, Imaginary Friend, and what it means for and what it means for every dungeon master and every dragon master. All right, let's get into this. So this is a really, really fascinating film. I'm really fascinated by it. So basically, the movie spoilers for If here. Um, the movie really explores this question of what what is the best way to say this. So the movie asks this question: why do some kids have imaginary friends, and why do some kids not have an imaginary friend, right? And it really brings up the question of why do some adults play Dungeons and Dragons and some don't. I can tell you right now, I have a sense, right? So I think you've been here too, right? Generally, adults do not want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like, I love, a huge part of my life is church, right? I go to church every Sunday. I sing my brothers and my sisters in Christ, and I talk to the adults there, right? And I learned a long time ago, do not tell your adult friends about your Dungeons and Dragons game from that week, from the weekend. Don't. And the reason why is they don't understand it. They don't understand it. They don't understand it. Legitimate. Like we saw this very clearly when the Dungeons and Dragons movie came out. Tons of reviewers were like, "Hey, they made a movie based on that video game Dungeons and Dragons. Hey, they made a movie based on this." I heard this more than any other. They made a movie on that board game Dungeons and Dragons. Most people did not even know. Most of the reviewers did not even know what Dungeons and Dragons was. The vast majority of people really don't understand what Dungeons and Dragons is, right? So they don't even know what it is. From there, then if they get a sense of what it is, they're like, wait a second, you take on another person, you take on another identity, and during the game you are another identity? And it's very difficult, and frankly, I think it's frightening for most adults, right? And so when I watched this film, like, it was very, like, I realized, yeah, I have seen the sunset on probably 35 different worlds, right? And that means I have stopped and I have thought about and I have had described to me, and then I have continued to remain within those spaces, right? How many worlds have you watched the sunset on, right? And this is this doesn't happen in Goblin Chop games, right? This doesn't happen in easily half of all Dungeons and Dragons games, right? If you're like, oh, hey, let's chop some goblins in half and have fun, nothing I'm talking about, nothing I'm saying applies to you, right? But what if you have a character that you genuinely weep for when, what if you've had a character that you wept over when that character passed, or that was a great loss to you, right? These are characters we live in, that we have these extra sets of sensation, memory, emotion, experience, right? These separate identities, right? And in those, you have stayed, to the morning, and you've watched the sunset, you've watched the sunrise, you've watched the sunrise on multiple worlds, right? And that's what I'm talking about, right? And it is extremely difficult to be in this space, right? And because we have this thing that's incredibly valuable to us that we can talk to virtually no one about, except people within the sphere, and the D&D sphere is very small. We know how large it is. It's in America. There are about 15 to 20 million people who play Dungeons and Dragons, right? America's got 340 million people, right? Like, so that means you're really looking at 320 million people you can never discuss this with, and 20 million people who you can discuss it with. But how many are in your area? You might be down to, like, and do you know them? And it's extremely small, right? So I walked into this film and I watched this terrible, terrible film. If is a terrible film. And the reason why is it's about imaginary friends, but if you took any child to this film, they would be bored to tears. The whole film is just like an old nostalgia play for old people, right? And so this isn't going to make any children happy, but it looks like a children's film, right? And then you have adults who know nothing about intangible entities, right? Intangible fighters, right? They're talking about imaginary friends, but they don't know anything about imaginary friends. They don't know why some kids create imaginary friends and some don't. They don't know what benefits an imaginary friend gives, and they certainly don't have any idea. There is no answers on how a adult would reconnect with an imaginary friend. And then also, what if you are an adult and you cannot remember if you had an imaginary friend or not? And then if you did have an imaginary friend, you can't see them now. This is a bucket of sadness for anyone who goes, right? And the reason why is it is what we're dealing with, right? And this problem, this unique problem of caring about an entity and thinking it's extremely real and really does impact our world and many other worlds, but not being able to talk about it with anybody else, right? Because they don't understand any value in that and it doesn't really ring true to them. It is a problem that we are struggling with 50 years after Gary Gygax delivered a narrative comment, right, to our culture, right? February 7th, 1974 is a date of joy, but it is also a date of sorrow in that there are many people like me who connect to Dungeons & Dragons and understand it at a different level, but really have to closet that part of their lives because people are not comfortable with it, they don't understand it, they don't value it, right? And so it's very unique, right? So I really do have incredible respect for the attempt that Krasinski and Ryan Reynolds put out to, and Steve Carell and Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and Sam Rock, and an amazing cast of incredible voice actors. But this movie failed to get the answers it needed before it started, and failed to find any answers on its journey to truth. There just wasn't anything there, right? It's a failure, but I have an incredible amount of respect for attempting to talk about intangible fighters, right? Imaginary friends. 6 of 1, right? Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider subscribing and have a fetch millennium.